For today's episode, I have a compilation of your favorite truck driving horror stories. Also, I'm super thankful to you for subscribing and helping me grow Mr. Scare's horror community with every new upload. So hit the like button, comment your favorite topic for the next episode, and meanwhile, I'll start reading the stories. I am a trucker and I had a spooky driving experience that has no explanation. This happened some 15 years ago as I was driving back up north from Newbury in the United Kingdom. Now I don't do anywhere near as much driving as you Americans, but for late night trips, I always operate a buddy system. You know, just in case there's any help needed. My friend had taken his rest and had woken up about 45 minutes before time to set off. I checked the weather forecast, and heavy fog is due across the M1 at around 2 a.m. And that was just the same time as I would be hitting that part of the route. I asked my buddy if we can set off half an hour earlier to skip it. He agrees and we set off. We're doing a good time thanks to the lack of traffic, but I can see a fog line appearing. It gets thick really fast. I take a look at the clock and it's 1:30 a.m. The damn weather forecasters got it wrong again, I think to myself. I ask my buddy to stay alert in case I miss something, as I'll be concentrating dead ahead on the foggy road. I have to slow to about 40 miles per hour from 70, because the visibility is basically nil. At the same time, stopping the car would be suicide if there was anything behind me. Based on my position, I was aware that there was a service station in about 15 miles. So I'll turn off there and wait it out. The fog starts getting really thick to the point where I'm thinking maybe it's actually safer to stop. I can't see the road at this point. I pull to the left slowly and wait for the telltale feel of the hard shoulders rumble strip. It didn't come, nor has the car hit a ditch. At this point, I'm a bit freaked out as I have no orientation and I can't see the road. I'm down to about 15 miles per hour now, as my buddy says.
Hey, there's a light in front of us.
It's a green light, which is odd for the motorway, but maybe I can see what's going on from there. I pick up a little speed and head towards the green light. As I'm driving forward, the fog begins to lift and I realize where we are. At the intersection of Beverly Road and the A63. The green light was a traffic light. I pull the car over and we both say to each other,
What the hell?
This is approximately 150 miles from where the fog started. A good 2.5 hours drive away. I look at my watch, and it showed 1:50 a.m. I take a look at the radio clock in the car, and it showed 4 a.m. I get my phone out, my buddy gets his phone out. Both devices say 1:50 a.m. As I look in the rear view, there's not a trace of fog behind me. Both of us are quite freaked out at this point, so we decided to find out which clock is right. I drive to the station. There was just past 4 a.m. To this day, I have no explanation, and neither of us can account for the missing 2.5 hours. Let alone the fact that how I managed to do multiple lane changes and junctions to get from the M1 to the M62, and then the A63. I think we traveled through time or through some wormhole. It was impossible that we could make time. And we were not high. And the clocks don't lie. I have a creepy story about a truck driver. It was maybe 2012 or 2013. I was 17 or 18 at the time. I worked at Target in Springfield, Illinois, and lived in Franklin, which is again in Illinois. If anyone listening to this is aware of where Franklin is, I will be genuinely surprised. It's about a 45 to 60 minute drive, mostly through long rural roads. The longest stretch is between New Berlin and Alexander. It's a 2-lane road, so you can pass, but you better get your car back in the right lane eventually. I had just gotten a music CD of Fall Out Boy, and I was listening and maybe singing along as I drove my small black car all the way home. The speed limit is 55 miles per hour. And I'm going 60 miles per hour. And gradually I'm coming up on this big white semi-truck. I remember him having a trailer, but I don't remember if it was a flatbed or a box. He's going slower than me, so I slow myself down to match. By the time I'm doing 45, I realize I'm going to be late home, and Mom's going to be unhappy about that. I have plenty of room, no one is coming, and I can pass him. So, I speed back up to 60 and start to go around him. And he starts speeding up too. Now I know that people do that when you pass them. It happens all the time where I'm from, and even happens where I live now. But this was slightly different than that. He was flooring it to keep up with me. This guy wasn't going to let me get in front of him. I was like, it's okay. I'll just slow down and then explain to Mom why I am late. And then he slows down as well. Back and forth, I sped up, I slowed down, and he matched me completely. This guy was not letting me back in the right lane. Now I'm aware that I am a very stubborn guy, but I had to get back over because I wasn't going to get pulled over for driving in the left lane. And then I saw this truck coming my way. It was a big truck. In rural areas, so all farmers have mini tanks that they drive around to transport their equipment, and their sons all have mini tanks that they drive around in to compensate for their lack of equipment. I'm assuming he's going 60 as well, which means, from 2 miles off, he's going to head-on slam into me in about 1 minute. And the semi will still not let me back over. I looked up at the semi driver, and he smiled at me. It wasn't angry, it wasn't scary, it was just a big happy grin. So that creeped me right out. So here I am, about to get in a head-on collision at 60 miles an hour with a truck 5 times my size. All because this psychopath to my right won't let me slow down or speed up. I'm 17 or 18. I'm panicking because I've never been through anything like that before. And then my radio gets louder. I didn't turn it up, but maybe I was just hearing it clearer, maybe it was a miracle. I don't know. But it's Sugar, we're going down, and we're at the part where he just says, and Sugar, we're going down swinging. To this day, that's my favorite part of that song. If I'm gonna die on that rural road, I'm gonna do it while trying to survive as hard as I could. So I floor it. I push the accelerator down as hard as I can. I discovered at that moment that when I feel abject moral terror, I actually start laughing. Which I'm sure is not a bad sign of anything. I got in front of the semi with barely a few seconds left. If we could stop in time, I could have reached out of my window and touched the front of that big red truck that was going to hit me. That white semi was just behind me, with his bumper nearly touching mine. I think I reached about 90 and was another 5 miles down the road before I slowed down and started crying a little bit. I might have screamed. I was freaking out, and adrenaline is a hell of a drug. So it ends there, right? Nope. The semi-truck dude is right behind me again. He was not respecting the 3-second following distance. He was honking and speeding up, and he nearly bumped me a couple of times. There were several stop signs as I reached Alexander that I just blew right through. Otherwise, he was going to hit me at about 60 or 70 from behind. I am driving a tiny car. I would have been smashed like a bug. I think I was doing about 40 or 50 when I hung my left turn to get on the road home, right next to the park in Alexander. Probably should have flipped my car. Another miracle, I guess. Or the fear of the moment has exaggerated the memory. Anyway, I got home, then told my parents. My dad asked if I had any details, which I didn't, and Mom wasn't upset. It turns out, I made it home in record time. My uncle used to drive a truck from Northern Europe down to Iraq in the 80s, when the Saddam regime was trying to modernize the country and were spending buttloads of money importing industrial equipment and foreign experts. Driving down to Iraq meant going through Turkey, because going through the Soviet Union was obviously not an option. Taking the Turkish route was ridiculously dangerous, because, at that time, Turkey had no social safety nets. Also, they had just experienced some kind of economic collapse, which had left millions of people unemployed, homeless, and destitute. In certain regions of Turkey, these desperate and starving people set up huge tent cities and shanty towns along the roads, hoping that some kind of opportunity passing along the road would provide them with some kind of wealth, or at least a meal for the day. But being desperate, they would often resort to banditry in an attempt to get some cash. One of their favorite methods was stopping foreign trucks, killing the drivers, and just stealing everything. They do anything and everything to stop these trucks, and then just descend on them like a swarm of ants attacking a larger animal. The most common method was bandits placing large objects in the middle of the road. The foreign drivers were instructed to never stop, just ram their way through obstacles. When the bandits realized this, they started kidnapping children and shoving them in front of trucks to make the drivers stop. Again, foreign drivers were instructed to just floor it and keep going, because if they stopped, they'd almost certainly be murdered. Another common issue was police corruption. The Turkish police would often stop foreign truck drivers and just rob them at gunpoint. This was because the cops knew that drivers carried large amounts of cash to pay for food, fuel, and other stuff. Other times, the police would make truck drivers follow them to secluded areas where they'd murder the truckers and steal the truck. Another thing that they would do was kidnap foreign drivers by arresting them on made-up charges and demanding huge amounts of money to free them from jail. So haulage contractors instructed their drivers to never stop for the Turkish police and to ram police cars if necessary. My uncle said he had to ram his way through obstacles on the road a few times, but he refuses to talk about whether or not any of those obstacles were live or not. I'm pretty sure he got PTSD from this shit, but he would never admit to it. I am a former truck driver. I was teaming up with my now husband in 1991. We had spent the entire day waiting to get loaded in Bend, Oregon. It is like in the middle of the state. We were finally on our way across a lonely 2-lane highway. I'm driving first while he is in the bunk. Side note, I was a bit naive and skittish back then, and he was always telling me to not panic when I come into an unusual situation. Well, after a few hours of heading back east, pitch black out, and with very few cars passing us in either direction, I came across a do not panic situation. I roll up on 2 orange cones sitting in the middle of each lane. So I roll to a stop, pull the brakes, and calmly wake him and tell him,
"We have a situation."
The opposite of skittish me, he was like,
Girl, run them cones over.
but I was scared of the cones being put there by officials, and I didn't want to move them. So while I'm sitting there trying to figure out what to do with little to no help from a sleepy man in the bunk, a car rolls up in the opposite direction. He stopped and inquired if I had put them there. I assured him I didn't. He assured me there was nothing behind him that warranted the cones. He ended up driving through the cones along the yellow line. Since I couldn't fit the truck between the 2 cones without running them over, I proclaimed to my partner,
"I know what I'll do. I'll move the cones and put them back."
He still teases me about that proclamation to this day. So I climb out and do my thing. While I'm out there, another car passes me going in my direction. The car doesn't stop, but apparently they took notes. When I got back in to move the truck forward, I did make the wise decision to keep going and not put them back where they were in the first place. So we finally pull into the next small town, and we pull over to switch drivers. While pulled over, a cop car rolls up on us. Bright blinding light bounced off the mirror in my face. They have me step out and go to the back of the truck to talk to one officer, while the other wanted to talk to my partner. On another side note, he was still in the bunk, awake but without any pants on, when they first told us to come out of the truck. Turns out that the car that passed me in my direction got to town and flagged the cops down that a Schneider truck was setting cones out in the middle of the road. So after searching out our truck for orange cones, they let us go. Now, years or decades later, I realize how lucky I was that I didn't get jumped when I got out of the truck to move the cones. I'm sure it was an ambush situation similar to the body in the road scam. Perhaps they didn't act because watching us they could tell there was a man in the bunk and I wasn't a solo driver. Technically speaking, I was driving a pickup truck at the time. At that time, I was working for a formerly great tech company doing retail point-of-sale upgrades. One of the technicians that had been on an overnight job had suddenly fallen sick, and they needed an extra hand in the middle of the night. I like making money, so I went out there in the middle of the night to a site, maybe 70 miles away. It was 1 or 2 a.m., and I'm going down roads that I wasn't familiar with. Right before I go around a bend on an empty 2-lane highway with, of course, no streetlights, I see that the road cones are sort of haphazardly set up to start to block off the left lane. I'm in the right, so I don't mind. But it was weird that there were no warning signs or anything, and then what seemed like a quarter-mile down the road, there is a car just stopped in the right lane. As in, it stood in the same lane that I was in. I slow down and nearly come to a stop because I'm a dumb teenager who didn't realize what this was. And out of the car, 2 dudes step out and start walking towards my truck. Well, I start to nope right out of there and run over a cone to get away. One dude tried to jump in front, but I got around him and sped off down the road. The traffic cones had stopped right where the stopped car was. I'm already a very anxious person, so after the panic and adrenaline wore off a few miles down the road, I called the cops to report what happened. Headlights appeared on the horizon behind me, which caused me to panic even more. I told the 911 dispatcher that I thought I was being followed, and I pulled off at the next exit because it had a gas station. I pulled off and the car behind did too. My heart was slamming in my chest as I pulled up the pump and sprinted into the store, only to find out that the car that had pulled in behind me was a completely different car than the one that was stopped in the road. It had a small woman driving it who had gotten out to pump her gas instead of the 2 dudes who had jumped out of their car. After I had collected myself and told the dispatcher it was someone else, I went out to ask her if she had seen the car stopped on the road after the cones. The lady pumping her gas says she had seen the cones, but there was no car stopped on the road when she passed by. 15 minutes later, a cop came by the gas station to take my statement about it and said that they had gotten a similar report a couple of weeks prior. But that was about it. I never heard back ever if the cops found anything or not. I am currently a truck driver, and this happened maybe around 3 years back. It was either something paranormal or just a bad case of sleep paralysis. But it really left me shaken that night. I was on my way to Arizona on the I-10, and I had just run out of drive time, so I stopped at a truck stop on the California-Arizona border in Blythe. I parked my truck in a parking spot right under a street lamp, went into the sleeper, closed my curtains, and watched some videos on my phone before I went to sleep. The next thing I know, I am awake and everything seems normal. I could even see a little streak of light coming through the curtains. But I then hear someone jingling their keys and using them to open up my truck. I even felt the person sit in the driver's seat, and I could hear the air releasing from the chair because of the weight of the person. I became confused and alarmed and tried to get up to see what was going on. But my body won't move. I tried to yell out to the person, but I can't say anything either. I then hear this person turn on the truck, and I can even hear the crackling of the radio and the weird voice of the weather channel that my truck always defaults to whenever it is turned on. The scary part that made me panic, though, is that I started to feel the truck move. I felt the truck move forward, and the long arch a truck would normally take to clear the trucks parked around it. At this point, I started struggling trying to move and trying to say something, but I still can't move or talk. I am panicking, and then all of a sudden, I get control of my body and I jump up and rip the curtains open. And to my surprise, no one is there. I am still parked in the same parking spot, my truck is still locked, and everything is turned off. I tried to tell myself that maybe it was the truck next to me, but I look outside and the same trucks are parked around me. I then come to the conclusion that it was most likely a case of sleep paralysis. This wasn't the first or last time I get sleep paralysis, but this was the most vivid one I have ever had. It was also made worse by the fact that I was by myself in a truck, that too in the middle of nowhere. There were so many details that made me think and believe that it was real. It's fascinating how the mind recreates every small detail that I would normally glance over.